When was the last time your buyer was actually in the room when you made a decision about them? Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Jasmine. This podcast exists because that question matters more than most marketing teams realize. Let's get into it. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. So today we're going to discuss one of your more recent blog posts where you ran a poll on LinkedIn and the results came back and three options land within a whisker of each other. No winner, just a number that looks like it says nothing. Most people shrug. They pick the one they liked anyway and file the whole exercise under inconclusive. That shrug right there, in my opinion, is the mistake and one that you really surface in your blog. I've been watching product and marketing teams do this for years. They run polls, surveys, different types of market research, and then they average the output into noise. The aggregate buries the answer every time. So in your blog, you put three book cover designs for your upcoming book in front of two audiences at once. The first was the humans on LinkedIn, and the second, a synthetic customer panel built from real buyer evidence. The headcount tied almost perfectly, and the three covers, the three audiences, and a number that looked useless. It was the most useful result you got all month. So can you walk us through what you actually found?
Yeah, so the setup was pretty simple. I started off with 15 covers, and over a weekend, I whittled those down to three. So there were three designs for the buyer in the loop. And the LinkedIn network voted publicly. My synthetic panel of four buyer personas voted as well. So we had quite a lot of interesting conversation, and there was some really helpful feedback on all of them. But yeah, the public vote landed almost exactly tied. And of course, with four persona across that synthetic customer panel, of course, there was going to be a winner if they had to vote, but it was too close to call.
So some people's instinct are to call that a failed experiment, but you didn't.
Yeah, but I almost did. And then I went back and I looked at every commenter by their actual role. And that's when the data stops being flat. The aggregate had hidden four completely different markets inside the one count.
So can we dig in a little bit more into what each segment actually did?
There were a number of different results. The most striking was that those that were leadership founders, senior executives, people that I'd studied with on the MBA, they typically went for the option two, which was in the middle. It had a very blue background, sort of a bit like a Gartner front cover, kind of authoritative. Their language always talked about credibility and positioning. It was the book that people were saying, oh, that's the book I should have on my shelf. But I don't want it to be on someone's shelf. I want it to be read. And this isn't really a book for leaders and founders. It's more for marketers and sales. And so it's for everybody, but it's a marketing book ostensibly. And then when you look at the marketers kind of broke across two groups, one for sort of a simpler, plainer cover, the others for one that was very, very similar to number one, but a few extra design tweaks to it. The more experienced marketers went for one, the less experienced marketers preferred to have the human head on it. And what was interesting is that most people that worked in sales tended to like the image where there was more of a person on there as well. So there was really interesting kind of split across those groups, but it was what they said that was really important as well.
Say more.
Well, a lot of people were buying a signal as much as the content. Senior marketers, the people whose literal job is to choose between options, split evenly across all three, which was most interesting. The one that actually pictured the buyer was preferred by junior marketers and sales. Their reasons were practical distinctiveness and visibility. And it was just really, really interesting that we had this group, but it really matched what the synthetic customers were saying as well in many, many ways. And so that showed the validity of the synthetic customer challenge, and also the fact that none of them could pick specific output.
Same three covers, four audiences, four different answers, which means you're not really looking at one market.
Exactly. And a tie and aggregate is the market telling you it's more than one market. And the only way to break that apart is to stop looking at the markets as a whole and start looking at who do you really want to influence.
So here's the part I want to slow down on a bit because this is where I think the blog goes somewhere genuinely interesting. Before any human voted, your synthetic panel had already mapped the terrain. And when the humans voted, the shape held.
Yeah, leadership went solely to two. Now, when I say leadership, I mean people in more specific management roles. The two marketing voices in the panel split, one for one for three, and the sales voice went to three. Then when the humans came in, they reproduced more or less the same structure. At least they found the fault lines. The individual votes moved around, but the shape of the disagreement really didn't.
So the panel never picked a winner. It predicted where the disagreement would live before a single person weighed in.
Absolutely. It gave me a really fast directional signal before I ever spent any time asking my network to jump in and help me decide.
So I want to push on this a bit more. I think there are three real objections that a life sciences marketer would bring to this methodology, and I'm curious on your answers.
Let's go.
Okay, so your LinkedIn audience is not really your buyer. You were polling peers, colleagues, people who you know, as you had just said. That's not a customer research sample. That's a professional social graphic in a sense. How do you defend what you learned from that?
Well, that's probably a weakness of my LinkedIn network that it's it's not my bias. But beyond that, I don't fully defend it as buyer research. I mean, this is a LinkedIn poll, and it's a limit. But what I'd say that the poll it really wasn't designed to tell me what buyers will do. It was designed to surface the language different stakeholders would talk about, what people said and thought, and those words were really important. Some of the LinkedIn votes, the commercial leaders, the senior execs, they are buyers and they sit right next to buyers. So the segmentation is useful, even if the sample is imperfect and probably too small to consider statistically significant. I can't extrapolate purchase intent just from that. But what I got was vocabulary and trade offs, and that was really helpful.
Okay, fair enough. You're giving up purchase intent, but holding the segmentation value. I'll take that. My next objection is around your synthetic panel who predicted the structure of the disagreement. But your synthetic panel was built by you from buyer evidence, fair enough, that you curated using archetypes that you constructed. If it predicted the shape of human disagreement, how do you know it's because the panel is calibrated to reality and not because you already knew intuitively how these buyer types would split? And you built that into the personas without realizing it. How do you rule that out? And that isn't a sophisticated mirror reflecting your own priors back at you.
I can't rule that out. A panel is built on real evidence, not just invented archetypes. But the framing, the weighting, the way that the voices were represented, yeah, there's some of me in that, I'm sure. The panel's likely to reproduce it. What I would say, though, is that I didn't ever feed them a preferred cover. I didn't tell them any of my preferences. I knew which I wanted to win, but that's beside the point. The panel still found a structure that the humans confirmed. But does that prove the method? Probably not on its own from one data point, but we've got other data points to prove this sort of approach anyway.
Mhm. So, if the panel had diverged from the human result, you'd have said the panel gave you directional signal. It diverged because real people are more complex, which makes sense. If it converged, which it did, you said the panel predicted the structure. That's up a hypothesis that can't lose. Both outcomes become evidence for the method.
I ran it as an experiment to see how well it would respond to imagery, honestly. I was surprised by just what it showed. And, the value is that it forced me to think in segments before I had any data at all. It did help me structure the question that I would ask of the data when it came in. Whether it predicted the answer is perhaps secondary to whether it sharpened how I looked for the answer and where I looked for the answer, but it's a fair critique.
So you're telling people to segment a poll that had what? A couple of dozen visible commenters, maybe, That's not a statistically meaningful sample. You can't build a segmentation strategy on maybe 20 votes sorted into 4 buckets.
Well, I think we had about 40, but you're absolutely right. To get to statistical significance, you need a discrete population of at least 400 votes to get that to a 95% confidence level. So am I confident? No. But this isn't a quantitative study. This was qualitative signal gathering and, frankly, also a marketing exercise. The question for qualitative work isn't this statistically significant. Is this useful? Do I get to a point where I get to data sufficiency? And I think the answer was yes, because after a while we stopped hearing new comments. And so that's something where I think that it was really important to hear. Was it directionally useful? Yes. Even with small sample, the vocabulary clustering was really real. Leadership used different words than sales. The pattern was really worth looking into. Is it enough? I wouldn't bet a product launch on it necessarily, but I would bet a design conversation. And that's exactly what I did.
Okay, so let's make this useful for our audience. When you're sitting on a tied result, what's the first move? What do they do in the next couple of hours?
So I'd go back and I'd have a look at the comments and the responses and tag the role of the person, not just the vote they cast. You want to know which role is pulling which way. A small amount of time to tie a turned number into a bit of a segmentation map.
So, several commenters, I think I was one of them, independently described a design you never put on the table. How do you operationalize that?
There's an element of taste, right? And not everybody's going to like the same thing. You look for the option people describe that you never offer. Anybody who moves past your choices and starts designing in the comments section is giving you the real answer. They're not picking the nearest available compromise. They're telling you what they actually want. So those descriptions were really telling. They were the brief for the next iteration round. And they've already gone to Jim McLeod, author of The Visual Marketer, and we've already come up with a final copy of what that cover's going to look like. And that means the vote really told us that the answer wasn't in those 3 covers at all. It was in something else. And I think we ended up with something much, much stronger. And I can't wait to show people what that final result is. But I think everybody will be a little bit surprised. And I hope a lot of people are going to buy it.
Absolutely. So, if someone in life sciences marketing is running a preference test right now on product positioning or a campaign asset or a messaging hierarchy, what's the single thing this changes about how they run it?
Well, I would stop asking who wins or what wins. I would start asking who's choosing each option and why. That segment behavior is your data. The count is really just the wrapper. Which buyer type is most decisive? Which is most split? And what would they have chosen if you'd offered them something else? That's where your real positioning lives. And it was clear that the positioning for one group of people that were my target, I hadn't built the perfect option. I'm hoping I've got much closer now. But of course, you're not going to capture the whole market with one option. There's always going to be variation within that. But it really helped us go from having no insight other than a synthetic customer panel, which was telling us something, to something that was much stronger. And what's really interesting, when I reran that test on the new panel, 3 of the 4 persona that were my key targets all voted for the new cover. We had a few options, but really I knew who I wanted to influence the most. And so that's where I'm headed now.
If you want the full breakdown, including the language each buyer segment reached for, why the tied result was more useful than a winner would have been, and what Matt is taking to his book designer next, I'd encourage you to go read the full blog at striven.com. We'll also drop the direct link in the show notes.
Thank you. And if you're staring at a split result in your own research and you want to think through what's hiding in it, you can reach us either through the contact us button on striven.com or find either of us on LinkedIn. We try not to be hard to find.
So, in the sense of mythology, Tantalus reached for the fruit that kept pulling away. Your audience is doing the same thing with the option you haven't built yet. Stop counting the votes, read who's reaching instead.
Tie, as they say, is in the map.
Superb. Thank you again, Matt. And I am very looking forward to reading the book once it comes out.
I'm looking forward to getting it in people's hands as well.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to a splice of life science marketing. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
If this conversation helped you, the single biggest way you can support the show is to subscribe and leave a review on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it, and it makes a huge difference.
You can find out more about us and the topics we discuss at striven.com or on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening. We hope to see you next time.